The chilly autumn morning in 2015 began with an unusual disturbance in the historic Fells Point neighborhood of Baltimore. 4 unmarked police cars quietly pulled up in front of a modest, 2-story red brick house on Tame Street, where golden light spilled through time-dusted window frames. Neighbors peeked through curtains as FBI-jacketed officers positioned themselves around the area, stringing up yellow tape along the cobblestone path leading to the backyard. Inside, 77-year-old Evelyn Hail was pouring her morning tea, a habit she had maintained for many years since the day her husband, engineer Richard Hail, vanished without a trace. The knock at the door came at 7:32. "I am Evelyn Hail, Maryland State Police. We have a warrant for your arrest in connection with the 1978 disappearance of Richard Hail." The officers later described how her hand trembled slightly as she set the teacup down, but her face remained eerily calm, as if she had known this day would come, and was merely waiting to hear the call of the past. Baltimore, the night of November 20th, 1978. The air was thick with cold and dampness, seeping from the waters of the Patapsco River. Deep into the Fells Point neighborhood, a historic district hugging the waterfront, where rows of red brick rowhouses stood shoulder to shoulder, moss-covered pitched roofs, windows opening directly onto narrow cobblestone alleys. The smell of coal, machine oil, and salty water mingled together, a scent the locals were so accustomed to that they no longer noticed it. That night, the wind blew hard, carrying the clanging of metal from ships anchored in the harbor like a distant and monotonous melody, signaling the approach of winter. In the 2-story house at 2120 Tame Street, golden light from the living room spilled out the window, smudging across the rain-wet pavement. 42-year-old Richard Hail, a mechanical engineer at the Bethlehem Steel Shipyard in Sparrows Point, had just returned after a workday stretching over 12 hours. That shift had ended late. He was the last to leave the yard as usual. Neighbors saw him come home around 10 that evening, his coat heavy with the smell of steel and industrial grease, carrying a leather briefcase and the afternoon newspaper. The small 2-story house sat in the middle of the quiet neighborhood. His wife, 38-year-old Evelyn Hail, had once been a nurse but had quit after having their child. They had a 6-year-old daughter sleeping upstairs. Folks around here still said they were a reserved couple, little conversation, few friends, but always on time for work, on time coming home, living by a steady, repeating rhythm. That night around 11:30, the neighbor across the street, Miss Louise Cooper, later recounted hearing something from the Hale house, like the sound of furniture shifting and a loud remark echoing out, then silence. She didn't pay it much mind. In this neighborhood, marital arguments weren't uncommon, especially since Richard often worked night shifts and came home late. But she remembered clearly that near midnight, the living room light was still on, bright enough that the glow spilled onto the wet sidewalk, reflecting off the glossy black cobblestones. Out on the harbor, the fog was thickening. The clock in the square ticked past midnight. A few bars along the docks were still open, rock music flickering amid the wind and ship horns. On the street where the Hale house stood, everything was silent enough to hear the clear drip of water from the downspout into the puddle by the roadside. Time dragged slowly through the damp chill of the port city. No one noticed anything unusual until the duty phone rang at Baltimore Police Headquarters at 2:12 a.m. An urgent call, a woman's voice rushed and choked with hurried breaths. "Please, there's someone in my house, a stranger. My husband is gone." The only sound still audible on the other end of the line were the steady patter of rain on the window, the ticking of a clock, and the woman's ragged breathing. After a few seconds of silence, the line went dead. The dispatcher immediately forwarded the report. Less than 10 minutes later, 2 patrol cars left Baltimore Police Headquarters, their blue and red lights sweeping through the empty streets, reflecting off the waterlogged pavement of Fells Point. When they arrived, the clock read 2:25 a.m. The house at 2120 Tame Street was still lit up. Golden light from the downstairs window spilled onto the wet street, stretching into a hazy streak, like torn light amid the fog. There were no sounds, only the wind whistling along the row house porches, carrying the signature scent of the port city, sea salt and metal. Officer Henry Collins was the first to step onto the stoop. He knocked, the sound echoing softly into the late night. The door opened almost immediately. Evelyn Hail stood there, her face pale, hair disheveled, her nightgown stained with dampness. She gripped the doorframe, her voice trembling to near inaudibility. You're here. There's someone in my house. My husband is gone." Collins signaled for his partner to follow. He stepped inside, sweeping his flashlight down the hallway. Everything was quiet. No disturbed furniture, no signs of a struggle, no other voices besides the wind whistling through the door cracks. The living room was brightly lit, a half-full coffee cup on the table, the armchair in its place. The whole house had an oddly tidy air, an order that didn't match a place where a crisis had just unfolded. No signs of forced entry, no items taken. The house was unusually clean. As he moved to the kitchen, he noticed a sharp, pungent chemical smell seeping into the air, something anyone who's ever cleaned house would recognize. Clorox. The wooden floor was slightly damp, the light reflecting in shiny patches. Collins crouched down, holding his hand near the floor, freshly mopped, not dry yet, he said quietly to his partner, then said no more. Evelyn slumped into a chair, her hands clasped together. "I was sleeping and heard a noise," she said haltingly. "I thought it was the cat or something. I came down to check, and there was someone in the house." He was wearing dark clothes. "I couldn't see clearly. I screamed and I think he hit me. I passed out. When I came to, Richard was gone." Collins examined the woman's face closely. No bruises, just a faint red mark on her cheek. The police fanned out to check each room. Upstairs, their 6-year-old daughter, Anna, was still fast asleep. Collins entered the couple's bedroom. The bed half-folded, the blanket askew, clothes neatly arranged in the closet, Richard's wallet and watch on the nightstand. His heavy coat hung behind the door, car keys still on the shelf. No signs that he had gone anywhere. "No signs of a fight," Collins muttered. "No break-in, and the man just vanished." He didn't voice what he was thinking, but an uneasy feeling crept into his mind. Too many things in this house, too clean. Around 3 a.m., 2 more officers arrived. One team combed the backyard and the alley behind the house. The other checked the path leading to the old docks. Flashlights swept over the Patapsco River surface, where the fog was so thick the beams were mere faint streaks. They found nothing. No footprints, no dropped items, no clothing, no slides in the mud. The water lay flat and still, mirroring distant lights like a glassy surface. Back at the house, Collins took a preliminary statement. He didn't ask Evelyn anything more, just said, "We'll start the search as soon as it's light out." She nodded, saying nothing, her eyes staring blankly toward the stairwell void. At 3:55 a.m., as the ambulance took Evelyn to the hospital for a check in a state of mild shock, Collins stepped out onto the porch. A light drizzle had begun. He looked back at the house one more time. The living room light still on. The curtain swaying gently in the wind. A house with no signs of break-in. No struggle. No cries for help. But missing one man. He folded his notebook, writing the final line before sealing the scene. Missing person. Suspicious circumstances. 2120 Tame Street, Fells Point. Outside, fog blanketed the street. The city still slept, unaware that just hours earlier in the heart of Baltimore, a man had vanished as if he had never existed. As dawn broke over the port city of Baltimore, fog still cloaked the Patapsco River. Cargo ships lay idle amid the gray haze, their horns sounding in distant, dry, muffled blasts. In Fells Point, Tame Street had stirred early, but 2120 remained cordoned off. A strip of yellow tape stretched across the porch, blocking the path to the damp stoop. Henry Collins stood outside, steam rising from the coffee cup in his hand. his eyes fixed on the window where the light had burned all night. He had seen many disappearances, but none had left him feeling so hollow and puzzled. No traces, no direction, just a house too clean and a man gone in the middle of the night. At 8 a.m., the official search team was mobilized. 12 officers, 2 bloodhounds and a group of neighborhood volunteers. The night's rain had made the ground slick, mud-soft and squelching underfoot. The bloodhounds sniffed from the Hale's back door, tracking about 20 men before losing the scent right by the wooden fence. The handler shook his head. No blood scent, no body scent, just chemicals. Collins knew right away it was the chlorine smell. From the backyard, they expanded the Search 3Me around the neighborhood. All morning, the internal radio crackled steadily in their earpieces. Team B checking the docks area, Team C along Alisana Street, Team D heading to the old boatyard. Small houses, abandoned warehouses and shipyards emerged from the fog. Somewhere the sound of metal clanging echoed, the rattle of anchor chains, swinging iron doors. Everything evoked a sense of chill desolation, like the disappearance itself. Near noon they scoured the riverside area where Richard often jogged. Every Sunday afternoon, Collins walked along the old wooden pier, shining his light down into the water. He saw only bottle caps, torn nets and drifting trash. No signs of a man fallen in. No scuff marks on the railing. No clothing, no footprints imprinted in the mud. It all stopped at the alley behind the house where the bloodhounds had first lost the trail. Another team searched the nearby parking lot. Richard's Plymouth Satellite sat untouched in front of the house. Keys still on the tray in the living room. His wallet, watch, coat all in place. Every detail only deepened Collins's unease. The man walks out of the house in the night. No wallet, no keys, no car, he said quietly to his partner, then answered himself. Maybe he didn't leave at all. That afternoon, police re-entered Evelyn at Mercy Hospital. She was still in a drained state, eyes sunken deep. When asked again about the time of Richard's disappearance, she replied vaguely, "I heard a noise, then got hit, then passed out." Collins asked, "Did you hear a door open?" "Not clearly. I just remember the house being dark and some strong smell." She emphasized the word strong smell, then fell silent. Back at the scene, Collins and the crime scene technicians re-swept every corner. They checked cabinets, floors, bathroom, basement, attic. No signs of violence, no missing items, no blood or struggle marks. Everything pointed to Richard having been there the night before, then vanishing without a trace. On the second day, the Baltimore Sun ran the story on page 3. Engineer missing after night dispute. Police seek leads in Fells Point mystery. The article noted that the victim was a well-regarded engineer at Bethlehem Steel. No debts, no criminal record, no personal conflicts. The final line read, "Police say they are not ruling out targeted foul play, but no specific evidence yet." On the third day of the search, rain poured down. The river swelled, cold wind whipped faces, the smell of metal and machine oil from the harbor filling the air. Rescue teams returned for one last sweep of the waterfront. A few plastic bags, cloth scraps, and rotted wood were pulled up, but nothing of value. As night fell, the rain grew heavier, visibility obscured, and Collins ordered a temporary halt to the search. In 3 days they found nothing. No body, no evidence, no signs of life or death. 72 hours after the 911 call, Richard Hale was still classified as missing. On Collins's desk, the scene summary report was neatly typed. House secure, no forced entry. Strong odor of cleaning agent, missing male, 42, Bethlehem Steel engineer. Below, a handwritten note in black ink added at the end. No progress after 72 hours. Possible domestic involvement. Insufficient evidence. Collins leaned back in his chair, gazing through the fogged window. Mist blanketed the harbor, obscuring ship lights. He knew that without leads in the first 3 days, the chances of finding the missing person alive were nearly zero. But what troubled him most wasn't the man's absence, but the feeling that the house still held something unseen. A secret hidden right in the heart of Baltimore, within the clean, cold walls of 2120 Tame Street. 3 days after the fruitless search, The atmosphere at Baltimore Police Headquarters grew heavy. Richard Hale's disappearance quickly drew local media attention, and Henry Collins, the lead on the search, was assigned to continue the investigation. He returned to the scene on Thursday morning when the yellow tape around 2120 Tame Street had darkened from the night's rain. Evelyn Hail waited in the living room, looking exhausted, her hands clenched around a teacup as if to stay alert. Collins began in a gentle tone. "Can you recount the whole incident as you remember it down to the smallest details?" Evelyn nodded, her breath catching. "I was sleeping and heard a noise downstairs. I went down and there was someone. He attacked me and I passed out. When I came to, Richard was gone." Collins asked, "Did you get a good look at him?" "No, I just saw a shadow." She paused, blinked, then added, "I think he hit me with something hard." When Collins asked about injuries, Evelyn pointed to the faint red mark on her left cheek. "No swelling, no broken skin. Did you see a doctor?" "They said it was just a light bump." The answer left him silent for a few seconds. He had heard statements like this dozens of times. Real victims usually remembered very clearly. But here the story felt like it was being recited from an unfinished script. That afternoon, Evelyn was brought to headquarters for a detailed statement. In the small room with the one-way mirror wall, Collins sat across from her, a blank sheet of paper between them. "This time I need you to be precise with the timeline. From when Richard got home to when you called 911. Evelyn was quiet for a moment, then began. "He got home around 10ish. We talked a bit. He showered, then went to his study. I went to bed first. When I woke up, he wasn't there. I think he took the gun." Collins looked up. "Gun? You said you were attacked." Evelyn bit her lip. "I might be mistaken. Everything happened so fast." After more than an hour, her account shifted at least 3 times from being knocked out to Richard leaving on his own, ending with, "I don't remember anymore." Collins didn't argue. He just glanced through the glass where his colleague behind it was subtly shaking his head. As they left the room, he said softly, "If you remember anything else, call me." The next day, police began canvassing the neighborhood residents. Mrs. Louise Cooper, the neighbor across the street, confirmed. "Around 11:30 that night I heard them arguing. Not loud, but clearly 2 voices. Then it went quiet. Someone 2 houses down said they saw the living room light on past midnight. Then it snapped off. No one saw Richard leave the house, nor did anyone see a stranger appear." Collins spent Friday afternoon talking to an old colleague of Richard's at the Bethlehem Steel Yard. The man described him as the principal type. No drinking, no debts, no trouble. When Collins asked about Richard's marriage, the colleague hesitated. He often worked overtime. Seemed like he didn't want to come home early. As dusk fell, Collins returned to the Fells Point house once more. No crime scene texts left, just him and a young officer on guard duty. Collins walked down the hallway, pausing where the wooden floor still faintly carried the chlorine scent. Everything too clean, too quiet. On the wall the wedding photo hung straight. Richard in a dark suit, Evelyn in a white dress, smiling faintly. He looked at the photo longer than necessary, then sighed softly. On the 5th day since Richard's disappearance, the official investigation shifted from missing persons search to examining possible family involvement. The press began asking questions. Small headlines in the morning paper. "Mystery deepens in Fells Point case. Police question wife." Evelyn still maintained her innocence. "I don't know what happened. I just want him back." But her voice was weary, as if she no longer fully believed her own words. Collins left the interrogation room that evening with a strange feeling, like walking through a house without windows, where every answer just led him back to the same wall. As he exited headquarters, the river wind blew icy cold, carrying moisture and machine oil scent. He paused on the steps, looking toward the harbor, where lights from the ship still blinked steadily in the night. In his mind, the case pieces remained scattered. The argument at 11:30, the light on until midnight. The husband vanished without a trace and the wife telling 3 different stories in 2 days. He didn't add any lines to the file that night. But deep down, he knew this was no longer an ordinary missing person case. In the days that followed, as media attention began to wane, Henry Collins quietly redirected the investigation. He knew this case wouldn't go far, relying only on the wife's muddled statements and the empty scene. No body, no witnesses, no clear physical evidence, but he believed something was being hidden. And like every marital case, he started where cracks showed most easily: money. At Baltimore Trust Bank, the Hale's financial record, in the 6 months before Richard's disappearance, their joint account had been steadily drained, with large sums transferred to a credit card in Evelyn's name only. The spending report listed a string of unexplained purchases: furniture, jewelry, a down payment on a new house in the Tulsa suburbs. Richard was the only one with steady income. Evelyn had quit work in 1975 after their daughter was born. When asked about the expenses, Evelyn replied indifferently, "We were house hunting. He wanted something quieter. I just handled the payments." But Collins noted the mismatch in her tone. No anxiety of a wife with a missing husband. More like someone trying to control the narrative. At the Bethlehem steel yard, Richard's colleagues told police that lately he'd been staying late, bringing work home and sometimes complaining about uncontrolled spending. A co-worker said he mentioned Evelyn wanting a bigger house, but he didn't agree. Straight up, they argued about money all the time. Collins made a mental note. He also learned another detail. Richard always carried a registered Smith & Wesson .38 revolver for protection during late shifts in the dock area. His close friend and co-worker Michael Wren said, "The last time I saw the gun was about a week before he vanished in his desk drawer at the office." Police went to the yard, checked the metal locker, but the drawer was empty. No gun, no signs of tampering. "Back with Evelyn?" Collins asked directly. "Do you know where your husband's gun is?" She shook her head, eyes avoiding his. "I don't know. Maybe he took it that night." "Did he usually carry the gun in the house?" "No, I don't like weapons." "But you knew your husband had a gun." "Yes, I told him to lock it up. I didn't want our daughter to see it." Collins was silent. He didn't say it out loud, but in his mind the picture was starting to come into sharper focus. Arguments over money, a missing gun, and a man vanished without a trace. But it was all still just speculation. No body, no blood, no witnesses. A case that couldn't be built without physical evidence. In the following days, the police continued to verify. They canvassed the neighborhood, checked the pawn shop system around Baltimore to see if anyone had sold or pawned a Smith & Wesson .38, but nothing turned up. Collins figured that if someone had taken the gun out, there had to be some signed cameras, receipts, or a witness, but there was nothing. The case began to cool off. Evelyn moved in temporarily with her sister in Tulsa, away from the prying eyes of neighbors and reporters. She still insisted that Richard might have been kidnapped or walked away from job stress. He'd said he was tired of everything. Maybe he just needed time, she said in the final interview, before her lawyer requested no further cooperation. Collins didn't buy it. No man needed time and left the house in the middle of a rainy night. No wallet, no car, no coat, leaving a 6-year-old daughter asleep alone upstairs. But he also knew belief wasn't enough to charge someone. The case stalled for 2 months. No new leads, no usable forensics reports, no evidence of crime. Finally, in early 1979, the Richard Hail file was shelved in the Criminal Investigation Division steel cabinet, labeled Missing Person, Presumed Dead, Insufficient Evidence. As he left headquarters that evening, Collins stood on the steps looking out over the harbor. Snow began to fall lightly, blanketing the river in a hazy silver layer. The ships remained anchored as if nothing had happened. But in his heart, this case had never closed. He believed that somewhere in that red brick house in Fells Point, the truth was still hidden deep, waiting only for someone patient enough to find it. A week after the investigation was paused, Baltimore remained sunk in the harsh late November cold. Over the Papsco River, the fog was so thick that the headlights from the docks were mere blurred dots of light. Though the official file was temporarily closed, Henry Collins couldn't let it go. He believed that if Richard truly hadn't left the city, the only answer lay where he had worked, the river. On November 28th, Collins assembled a small team of dock workers, firefighters, and a few Fells Point area volunteers. They began combing the riverbank from Dock 12, extending to the old Bethlehem Steel Warehouse area. A steady drizzle fell, cold wind whipping through and making the river choppy, the grey water surface slick like an oil sheen. Small boats motor-towed slowly, dragnets lowered, sweeping each area methodically. Anything coat, wallet, or a scrap of fabric, report it right away, Collins instructed. He stood on the pier, collar gripped tight, eyes following the flashlight beams casting down into the dark water. The river held an eerie silence. No signs of an accident or a body sunk to the bottom. Veteran dock workers said the current here was strong. If someone fell in, the body would be swept far away in just hours. But Collins didn't believe Richard had fallen into the water. No skid marks, no footprints, no dropped items. It was as if someone had deliberately made him disappear. By noon, the search expanded eastward, to the abandoned moorings and old wooden bridges. Bloodhounds were brought in, but they only picked up scents of oil, dead fish, and damp trash. No human trace. The nets hauled up only bottle caps, rubber sheets, and rotted wood. A plastic bag pulled up, made everyone hold their breath. But inside were just a few scraps of torn clothing and an old pair of unidentifiable shoes. Collins looked at them, then quietly nodded for them to bag as evidence, though he knew it led nowhere. In the afternoon, the rain grew heavier. The volunteers were soaked through, boots caked in mud. Police set up barriers along the riverbank to keep out reporters and the curious, but information still leaked out. That afternoon, the Baltimore Sun ran a short item. Search for missing engineer yields no results. Police continue to investigate. Just a few lines, but enough to tag the case as a mysterious disappearance. As the last light of the afternoon faded, the search team regrouped at the main pier. An old dock worker, Mr. Lewis, said quietly to Collins, "I've seen plenty of folks fall into this river, Sergeant. But if he really went in, at least something would float up here." Nothing. Collins just nodded, eyes fixed on the churning, murky water. He knew Lewis was right. Not a single personal item of Richard's was found. No coat, no watch, no wallet, no papers, just an invisible void between that night and the next morning when he vanished. The next 2 days, Collins had the entire riverbank area swept again, this time with support from a rescue team using sonar-equipped boats to scan the bottom. The results were the same as before. No foreign objects, no body, no signals beyond a few rusted iron scraps. The weary faces, sunken eyes, and headlights beaming into the water only made the scene more chilling. By the end of the 3rd day, Collins held a brief meeting with the search team. Wind howled fiercely, carrying sheets of fine rain into their faces. He spoke slowly, voice from the cold gusts. "We've covered every inch within a 3-mile radius. If there's anything in the water, we'd have found it. I know everyone's done their best." No one said another word. A few packed up gear. Others stared out at the river, where small waves rippled in the darkness. The next morning, the termination report was signed and sent to investigations. All leads exhausted. Search terminated, short and to the point. But for Collins, it felt like a cold knife, closing the last sliver of hope. At this point, Richard Hale's disappearance still had no confirmed criminal evidence. No body, no witnesses, no physical proof. Just scattered fragments of the story. The argument at 11:30 p.m., the house gleaming with chlorine scent, and the wife with evasive eyes every time the gun was mentioned. As Collins left the docks that day, he glanced back one last time. The river still flowed lazily under the thick white fog, revealing nothing. For many, the case was considered closed. But in Collins's mind, it had only just begun to become an obsession. A wordless void somewhere in the port city, where too many things were buried with the mist and silence. Winter 1979 blanketed Baltimore in a thicker fog than any year before. Snow fell early, turning the Patapsco River milky white and the dock silent. Richard Hale's disappearance had passed more than 2 months, and no one mentioned the name anymore. In the morning news, the streets of Fells Point returned to their daily rhythm. Bars opening, music spilling from beer-fogged windows, and the house at 2120 Tame Street, standing shuttered, a crooked Farral sign staked in the yard. Officer Henry Collins sat in his third-floor office at Baltimore PD headquarters, a thick file before him, its light brown cardboard cover frayed at the edges. He flipped through the pages slowly. Evelyn's statement, neighbor reports, river search logs, house inspection notes, and finally the memo on the Smith & Wesson 38. The one item in the case never found. No blood, no body, no signs of crime, just a man gone, a wife telling a story no one could verify, and a chlorine smell never explained. Collins had exhausted. He'd hoped for a late forensics report from the crime lab, but the results came back. Negative findings, no blood traces, no useful samples, no anomalies. He couldn't hide his disappointment. "We got nothing to keep it open," his supervising lieutenant told him when signing the final decision. "Unless new evidence turns up, this one's closed." On February 5, 1979, File 78204 Missing Person, Richard Hale was officially marked inactive. Collins read through it one last time. On the final page of the summary, he wrote by hand in blue ink, "Suspect likely domestic. Evidence missing. Case inconclusive." That was all he could record. Concise, emotionless, but each word like a slash, closing 2 months of exhaustive work. The remaining evidence in the case was just a few black and white scene photos, a reel of Evelyn's tape statement, and a copy of the gun registration. Everything was sealed in a medium evidence box labeled in white. Richard Hale, Fells Point, 1978. On the box's corner, a small pencil note, possible domestic involvement. Collins personally carried the box down to the storage basement. The department's evidence vault was deep underground, a long corridor of metal shelves stacked to the ceiling, stuffy with the smell of old paper and steel. He placed the box on the shelf among hundreds of other cases, burglaries, murders, disappearances, stories that never ended. A small clunk echoed as the box metal dry and heavy. As he left the vault, the dim yellow overhead lights cast a faint streak across his shoulder. Collins paused at the door, glancing back at the stacked shelves, then quietly closed the heavy steel door behind him. The latch clicked, echoing down the empty hall, the final sound of a case he knew he'd never forget. In the year-end report, the summary line was just a few words. Case No. 78204 closed, evidence retained. No closing ceremony, no announcement, no one asking more. Richard Hale became one of hundreds of names on Baltimore's list of unsolved missing persons. But for Henry Collins, the case never truly closed. Every time he passed the Patapsco riverbank, looking at the fog over the water, he remembered the golden light in the house at 2120, where everything was too neat, too clean, and too quiet to be coincidence. In that silence, he felt like he could still hear something, the ticking of the clock in the night and the question that never had an answer. Had Richard Hale disappeared, or had someone made him disappear? Time passed, and with it, the city's memory of the strange disappearance in Fells Point. 3.5 decades went by. The cobblestone streets where Richard Hale once lived had changed. Old bars were replaced by brightly lit coffee shops, ancient docks renovated into bustling commercial areas. The house at 2120 Tame Street was still there, but the windows replaced, walls repainted, and no one remembered the engineer who vanished in the rainy night of 1978. In the basement storage of Baltimore Police Department, the evidence box with code No. 78204 still sat quietly on the third shelf, dust-covered. Inside were a few scratched black and white photos, a faded tape reel, and a handwritten note. Suspect likely domestic. Evidence missing. The blue ink had blurred, but Henry Collins's handwriting was still recognizable. Collins had retired in 1992, living in the suburbs of Harford County. He was never free of the obsession with the case. At old officers' reunions, folks still heard him mention it, voice steady and low. That house had something off about it. Too clean, like someone tried to wipe everything away. When he died in the fall of 2001 from a heart attack, they said he still kept a scene photo in his desk drawer. The golden light spilling from the window the night of November 20th, 1978. In the years after, File H-7824 was pulled a few times, but no one got further than Henry Collins. A young investigator in 1993 reviewed the file, then jotted briefly in the report. No further development. Another team in 2002 tried cross-checking data on unidentified bodies found in Maryland waterways around the time, but no matches to Richard Hale's dental records. The case sank again, just like the river had swallowed every trace. By 2014, a full inventory of old files was underway. The archives room was assigned to Detective Lisa Moreno of the Cold Case Unit. She just transferred from homicide. Young, meticulous, and with a particular fondness for digging up forgotten cases, Moreno and her team were tasked with reviewing nobody files from 1970. 1990, cases of missing but suspicious. One June afternoon, as she scanned the missing persons catalogue, a name made her pause. Richard Hale, 1978, Fells Point. She pulled the file box from the shelf. A thick layer of dust rose, making her cough lightly. When she opened the lid, inside was a thinner report than she'd expected, under 30 pages, but something caught her eye immediately. Collins' final note: suspect likely domestic. Evidence missing. Moreno read every page carefully, marking odd details in red pen. Asterisk, no signs of forced entry. Ice strong bleach Clorox odor asterisk missing. Smith & Wesson 38. Revolver asterisk wife gave 3. Different versions. Oh, she paused at the black and white photo taken in the kitchen, light reflecting off the wet. Florid detail no later report mentioned. Moreno saw in it not just a disappearance but a case left unfinished, stopped right at the threshold before becoming a murder. That evening she opened a new note file in the cold case system, typing a few short lines. No body missing, gun, strong bleach odor, potential domestic homicide. Recommend review. After 36 years, a case thought forever lost to oblivion had just been placed back on the desk. Under the dim yellow light of the cold case office, Lisa Moreno sat looking at the black and white photo of the house at 2120 Tame Street. She didn't know what she'd find, but her gut told her Henry Collins had been right. That house still held something no one had ever uncovered. March 2015, Baltimore's sky was overcast, a steady drizzle falling for days on end. Fells Point was far different from 40 years before. Old bars swapped for modern coffee shops, historic brick houses renovated into rental apartments. The house at 2120 Tame Street, once the scene of the 1978 disappearance, now belonged to a young couple who had bought it from a real estate company. They hired a crew to fix up the basement, a space the previous owner called damp and musty. None of them knew they were about to touch a secret, buried for nearly 4 decades. On the afternoon of March the 12th, a worker named Mark Delaney was chiseling the wall to replace old plumbing when he noticed something odd. The cement in the north corner wall was a different color from the rest. It was smoother, thicker, and without the mold spots like the other walls. When Mark tapped it with his hammer, the sound echoed dull and deep. "This spot was patched over," he said to his co-worker. After a few chisels, the cement flaked off, revealing a small hollow cavity, sealed with a nearly 3-inch thick layer of mortar. The smell of rust and plaster dust filled the basement. When they shone the flashlight inside, the beam lit up a dull metal object, tilted in the recess corner. Mark crouched down, pulling it out gently. It was a Smith & Wesson 38 revolver, barrel lightly rusted, wooden grip faded. Next to it was a rolled-up cloth scrap turned dark brown, stiff as if stuck with something. "God, what the hell is this?" Mark muttered softly, then immediately called the site manager. 10 minutes later, local police arrived. They sealed the basement, photographed the scene, and contacted Baltimore Police Department right away. One of the young officers, checking the faded serial number etched on the gun barrel, muttered Smith & Wesson, serial R1174. Wait, this matches the 1978 missing persons file. The news shot to the cold case unit, and Detective Lisa Moreno got the call at 8:00 p.m. that same day. When she heard the address 2120 Street, she stood frozen for a few seconds. 40 years after the night Richard Hail vanished, that house's name came up again. The next morning, Moreno was at the scene. She descended into the basement where yellow light from industrial lamps shone on the freshly chiseled wall. On the floor, the gun lay in a clear plastic evidence bag, the old cloth scrap wrapped separately beside it. Tiny dust motes floated in the air, making her feel like she was standing between 2 points in time, a piece of the past being peeled back layer by layer. "You're saying it was in this wall all this time?" she asked the scene officer. "Yes, looks like it was hand-patched with cement. Pretty thick." According to the contractor, this layer wasn't in the house's original blueprints. Any signs of recent tampering? None. The cement has aged. Could be from the late 70s. Moreno crouched to examine the gun closely. Though time had rusted the metal, the shape and details were still clear. She knew right away she was looking at what Henry Collins had searched for in the final months of 1978, the piece he never found. Police collected all the evidence, sealed it, and transported it to the Maryland State Police Crime Lab in Pikesville. The old cloth sample was handled separately, sent for DNA analysis. Moreno stood still for a moment by the basement door before leaving. Outside, the drizzle fell lightly, chill seeping into the air. She looked at the house one last time, the fresh paint on the walls, white window frames, flower-planted porch, all looking impossibly serene. That evening, back at the cold case office, Moreno placed the #78204 file box on her desk. Beside it was a new folder of scene photos. She opened to the first page, looking again at Collins' faded incline. Suspect likely domestic evidence missing. Then she sighed, typing a new note on the keyboard. 2015 firearm recovered from residence wall. 2120 Tame Street case reopened for review. The desk lamp's light cast on her face cold and resolute. 40 years gone by. The final evidence had returned from the past on its own, and with it, Richard Hale's disappearance was no longer an open-ended question. It had come back, and this time the truth wouldn't stay buried. Maryland State Police Crime Lab, Pikesville, a place where long-dead cases sometimes revived through technology. In the sterile white-lit room, cold as steel, forensics technicians began unsealing the evidence bags shipped from Baltimore. A rusted Smith & Wesson .38 and a dark brown old cloth scrap, wrapped separately in a sterile pouch. Both items had lain in the Hale house wall for nearly 40 years, preserved in unintentional perfection. No light, no moisture, no external interference. The first step was DNA analysis on the cloth scrap. Under the microscope, the dry brown spots clung tightly to the worn cotton fibers. The technician extracted the biological sample using modern centrifugation and enzyme methods, techniques that didn't exist in 1978. A small drop of solution containing DNA strands was placed into the analyzer. Hundreds of gene sequences scrolled across the screen, bright bands lighting up over time. The first results appeared after 2 days. DNA profile match. Richard Hale reference sample #78204 hair. The reference baseline was a hair sample preserved from the original case. In 1978, Henry Collins had collected a strand from Richard's pillow and kept it in the evidence file. At the time it was useless, but now with mitochondrial DNA analysis it became the key. The DNA on the cloth matched perfectly, confirming the human blood on the fabric belonged to Richard Hale. After 37 years, there was finally direct biological evidence linking the victim to the house. The results were forwarded to Baltimore PD. In the initial report, biological material recovered. DNA confirmed to belong to victim Richard Hail. Likely blood origin. Detective Lisa Moreno read those words over and over. She didn't smile, just leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes for a few seconds. To her, each word felt like footsteps from the past returning, clear and weighty. Meanwhile, the ballistics forensics team began working on the Smith & Wesson 38 Special. They soaked off the rust with a neutralizing solution, dried each part, and examined under optical microscopes to reveal the serial number. After a few hours, the faded numbers emerged. RA174298, matching exactly the 1976 gun registration in Richard Hale's name. The missing man's gun, no doubt about it. When disassembling the barrel, the technician found a spent cartridge still with dry residue inside. Analyzing the rifling grooves and twist structure, they cross-matched with old data in the Baltimore Police ballistics file. A black and white photo in the 1978 file showed a small round indentation on the bedroom wall, which Henry Collins had noted possible projectile impact, unconfirmed. The tech team reconstructed the bullet trajectory using 3D software. Firing angle 38, height 32 in from the floor, matching exactly the position of the bed in the scene diagram. The ballistics expert's conclusion trajectory, consistent with single gunshot fired within bedroom. No evidence of ricochet or external origin. Likely fired from same firearm. The gun, the indentation, and the blood on the cloth all aligned. Richard Hail hadn't disappeared. He had been shot right in his own home. Moreno followed the entire testing process, missing hardly a detail. She knew each step was reconstructing what Henry Collins had suspected, but couldn't prove. When the full report was complete, she went to the lab herself to hear the final results. The technician showed her electron microscope images of the gun's metal surface, patchy oxidation, but interspersed with arc-shaped corrosion marks. "This isn't natural rust," he said. "We detected traces of sodium hypochlorite, the main compound in Clorox. Someone wiped down the gun with a cleaning solution before hiding it." Moreno stared at the screen, a chill running down her spine. She recalled the lines in the 1978 report. Strong bleach odor present throughout house. Henry Collins had smelled what he couldn't prove. Now science had proven it for him. She returned to the house at 2120 10th Street that same week in the afternoon. The new owner stood on the porch, nodding as she flashed her badge. In the basement, where the wall had been chiseled open, light pierced through the cement dust, reflecting off the now sealed cavity. She stood still for a moment, imagining someone back then cleaning, wrapping the gun, placing it in the wall and sealing it with mortar. Each motion slow, calculated, leaving no trace. As she got back in the car, she called the state prosecutor's office. "What do we have?" the voice on the other end asked. Moreno replied curtly. "Blood, gun, Clorox traces, no doubt anymore. The shot happened in the house. No break-in." On the steering wheel, she placed a copy of Collins's old scene photo next to the newly simulated bullet mark image. 2 images, 2 errors matched almost perfectly. The only difference was that this time science spoke for intuition. That evening, Moreno sat in the cold case office writing the case reopening report. The header read clearly, "Case number 78204, Richard Hail. Evidence recovered. Confirmed homicide." The desk lamp cast light on her face, reflecting off the glass on the wall where Henry Collins's name was still printed in the investigators of record list. 37 years earlier, he had closed the file with the words "evidence missing." Now Lisa Moreno added a new line right below it. "Evidence found." That night, the Baltimore Cold Case Unit office had only Detective Lisa Moreno awake. The light from the desk lamp shone on the old file, thick and frayed at the edges, its light brown cover bearing code 78204, the Richard Hail disappearance, 1978. Beside it was a thicker, brand-new printout headlined Reopened Homicide Review Evidence 2015. The two files lay side by side, separated by nearly 4 decades. Moreno opened the first page of the old one. Her own reading voice echoed softly in the room. No signs of forced entry. Strong Clorox odor. Wife reported hearing a noise. Passing out, waking to find husband gone. She paused at Sergeant Henry Collins's handwritten line in blue ink. Still clear. House too clean. Story inconsistent. Each reread brought the same realization. Collins had no evidence. But he was right. Everything he noted, the Clorox smell, the unnatural tidiness, the changing statements matched the current scientific results perfectly. Moreno took a pen and underlined 3 elements. Bleach. No forced entry, marital dispute. 3 keys to this case, she murmured as if continuing Collins's words. The next morning, she assembled the department's digital forensics team to reconstruct the 3D scene. Based on the 1978 black and white photos, combined with house blueprints obtained from the real estate company, the software recreated the entire 2120 Tame Street house, second-floor bedroom, wooden staircase, narrow hallway leading to the basement. On the screen, laser points gradually formed the house shape, the same spot where the bullet pierced the wall, the indentation Collins had captured with his old film camera. The tech specialist inputted the new ballistics data. Firing angle 38 degrees, height 32 in, distance 1.6 meters from the shooter's position. In the simulation, the bullet path ran precisely from the foot of the bed from where the shooter stood taller than the target and embedded in the left wall. Behind that wall, per the blueprints, was the path to the basement. And the gun, Moreno said, pointing at the model, was found in the wall right below this spot. The room fell silent. No doubt left. Someone had shot Richard Hail in the bedroom, cleaned the scene, hidden the gun in the basement, and sealed the wall with cement to erase the traces. Moreno opened more old scene photos. In one, the wooden floor near the kitchen door gleamed brighter than the rest, evidence it had been thoroughly wiped. She zoomed in on the area, measured the light reflection angle, then overlaid it with a 2015 crime scene photo from the forensics team. The line between the 2 points formed a straight axis leading exactly to the wall cavity where the gun was found. Everything matched in a terrifying way. That person didn't just clean. They knew exactly what they were erasing, she said to her assistant, and only someone living in the house would have had enough time to do it. The next step was reconstructing the post-shot sequence of actions. Moreno wrote on the whiteboard, "Argument at 11:30 p.m. Neighbors heard. 2 gunshot fired, possibly just 1 round. 3. Scene cleaned with Clorox solution. 4. Gun and bloody items hidden in basement wall. 5. 911 call at 2:12 a.m. Staging a fake break." She circled the timeline 3 empty hours between the shot and the 911 call. "These 3 hours," she said quietly, "are the void of truth." After completing the model, the forensics team presented the preliminary report. No evidence of external break-in. No signs of struggle. Asterisk all items in place except the missing gun. Asterisk Clorox traces on wood and metal, matching common household cleaner. Moreno added to the assessment section. Clorox cleaning aimed to erase blood and fingerprints. Hiding the gun in the wall indicates the perpetrator had time, composure, and knowledge of the house structure. No signs of outside crime. Conclusion: domestic occurrence. That afternoon, she stood before the large board in the office looking at the pinned images. Richard Hail, the wedding photo, the 1978 scene, and the newly recovered gun. All that was missing was the body. In the report to superiors, Moreno wrote, "From DNA ballistics and 3D scene analysis results, there is sufficient basis to classify Richard Hail's 1978 disappearance as a domestic homicide. Perpetrator, likely a direct relation to the victim, body not yet located. Recommendation, re-interview Evelyn Hail." She printed the report, placing it alongside Collins's old file. 2 eras of investigation, 2 different people meeting on the same page. Moreno lightly touched the line Collins had written nearly 40 years ago. "House too clean." "You were right, Henry," she whispered. "Too clean because someone wanted it that way." That evening, as she left the office, she turned off the light. The glow snapped out, leaving only the computer's blinking red light shining on the two files side by side, one old, one new, like two ends of the same story about to be closed. June 2015, nearly 40 years after the night Richard Hale vanished. Evelyn Hail, now 77, lived quietly in a small town in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Her modest wooden house sat on a tree-lined street, just a few blocks from the local church. Neighbors described her as a quiet, polite, but reserved woman, knowing little of her past, only that she had a husband who disappeared a long time ago. When Detective Lisa Moreno, accompanied by a Pennsylvania state trooper, knocked on the door, Evelyn opened it with surprise mixed with weariness. Her silver hair cut short, face gaunt and dry, but her grey-blue eyes still shone cold and sharp like in the old 1978 photo. She introduced herself, flashed her badge, and got straight to it. "Mrs. Hale, I'm an investigator from Baltimore's cold case unit. I need to talk to you about your husband, Richard Hale's disappearance." The small living room was filled with the scent of old wood and licorice. Evelyn invited them to sit, her hand trembling slightly as she set the teapot on the table. "I thought that case was done a long time ago," she said, voice even emotionless. Moreno replied gently, "We've come across some new evidence. I just want to hear the story again as you remember it." The interview took place at the house, but was recorded and filmed per procedure. Evelyn began recounting in a slow voice, pausing at times. "That night I was sleeping, then heard a noise. I thought it was the cat. I went down to the kitchen, then saw someone in the house. I screamed, then passed out. When I woke up, Richard was gone." "I've said that many times already." Moreno nodded. "I know, but we have a few details we'd like you to clarify. When you woke up, was anything unusual in the house?" Evelyn looked down at her hands. "No, I just remember the house being very quiet." "Did you hear a gunshot?" "No, no gunshot at all." "Do you recall if your husband took his gun that night?" She looked up, eyes suddenly tense. "Gun? No, I think he took it." "Maybe he did." Moreno paused for a few seconds. "You told police in 1978 that you didn't like guns, correct?" "Right, I didn't like them. I told him to put it away, but you knew he had a Smith & Wesson .38. Evelyn nodded slightly. "I knew everyone knew. He kept it in the cabinet." Moreno pulled a photo from her bag. "The gun found in the basement wall. Do you recognize this one?" Evelyn glanced at it, then turned away. "I'm not sure. A lot of guns look alike. Can you explain why the gun registered to your husband was found in your house, cemented into the wall?" She fell silent. No sound but the wall clock ticking. After a long moment, Evelyn spoke, voice, "I don't know. I left Baltimore many years ago. That house has changed hands many times." Moreno looked her straight in the eye. "That cement was patched in 1978, the year he disappeared." Evelyn turned away, hand lightly smoothing her collar. "Maybe someone did it. Maybe the intruder. There were no signs of break-in. Ma'am, no broken doors. No missing items. You were the last person to see him." This time Evelyn didn't respond. She stared blankly into space, eyes gradually glazing over. Moreno recognized the familiar sign, the defensive reaction of someone cornered. Her voice lowered, softening. "I know this is hard for you, but after 37 years the truth is still there, and if you really did nothing wrong, this is your chance to set it straight." Evelyn gave a slight smile, a cold one, almost weary. The truth went with Richard. "I don't know what you're looking for anymore," Moreno replied softly. "We found his blood in the house." The silence was absolute. Evelyn didn't turn back, just pressed her lips tight, then said quietly, "I don't remember anything." The interrogation lasted nearly 2 hours. Every time Moreno asked for details about the Clorox smell, the time between midnight and the 911 call, or any conflicts with Richard, Evelyn answered vaguely or evasively. The story kept shifting, sometimes knocked out, other times heard the door, then woke up to find it light out. After the session, Moreno and the accompanying officer sat in the car. Outside, a light drizzle began. She opened her notebook, writing curtly. Subject, Evelyn Hail, 77 Yo. Narrative, inconsistent, avoidant behavior when confronted with firearm. Emotional flatness, unreliable, defensive answers. She closed the notebook, looking out the window. The image of the elderly woman sitting alone in the old wooden house stayed sharp in her mind. Not trembling, not panicked, just eerily empty. 3 days later, the official report was submitted to the Maryland State Prosecutor's Office. Based on physical evidence, DNA, ballistics, Clorox traces, and Evelyn Hale's contradictory statements, Moreno recommended a temporary arrest warrant to continue interrogation as a suspect in the murder. On the first morning of July, the warrant was signed. Moreno received a copy standing still in the courthouse hallway. She knew this was just the beginning. The old case was coming alive, and the woman who had called 911 on that rainy night in 1978 would now answer for what she had hidden for 40 years. As she left headquarters, she looked at the gray sky and said quietly, as if to someone no longer here, "Henry, we're almost there." September 14th, 2015 morning, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. The sky overcast, gray clouds blanketing the trees along the quiet street where Evelyn Hail lived. The Maryland State Investigative Team, coordinating with local police, had surrounded the white wooden house at the corner of Maple Street, the small home where the 77-year-old woman had lived alone for over 20 years. When they knocked, Evelyn opened the door in a dark wool robe, her expression strangely calm, as if she had known this day would come. "Mrs. Evelyn Hail," Moreno said, flashing her badge while reading the warrant. "By order of the Maryland State Court, you are under arrest for second-degree murder in connection with the death of Richard Hale, 1978. Evelyn looked at the paper, lips trembling slightly, then lifted her eyes to Moreno. 40 years, she said softly, voice raspy. "You finally found what you wanted." "Not what we wanted," Moreno replied, "but what the truth wanted." She didn't resist. No screaming, no questions. As the handcuffs clicked shut, Evelyn just raised her head to look out at the sky. The early morning was cold, thin sunlight filtering through the branches, falling on the wrinkled face drained of color. Local reporters began arriving as the police car rolled away from Maple Street, blue and red lights flashing on the window glass. After nearly 4 decades, the wife in Baltimore's famous disappearance case had finally been arrested. That same day, police searched Evelyn's house under a search warrant. In the old drawer of a wooden desk in the bedroom, they found a faded leather-bound notebook, thin and so worn that the edges of the pages were crumbling. Amid the scattered diary entries from the 1970s, one line made Moreno freeze, he argued again tonight. The short sentence, written in blue ink, dated November 19th, 1978, just 1 day before Richard disappeared. "This is her diary," the technician said. Moreno flipped through a few more pages, seeing other notes about debts, about the house not being big enough, about his voice echoing in my head forever. No clear confession, but the tone was full of resentment and despair. As she was transported back to Baltimore, remained silent. Police took her to the county's temporary holding cell, where the press had already gathered outside. In the hallway, Assistant State's Attorney Daniel Crow, the Maryland State Prosecutor handling the case, stood before dozens of microphones. The autumn wind blew hard, scattering scraps of paper from the reporter's hands, but his voice rang out. 37 years ago, a man vanished in the night, and all questions were buried under brick walls and silence. Today, that silence has been broken. The truth doesn't go away. It just waits for someone patient enough to listen. Crow confirmed that Evelyn Hail was being charged with second-degree murder with aggravating factors. DNA evidence matching the victim, the gun registered in the victim's name found in the house, Clorox traces on the evidence and intentional concealment of physical proof. We have enough evidence to prove that Richard Hale was shot dead in his own home, and the perpetrator erased the traces by hiding the gun in the wall, he said. Behind him, Moreno stood still, holding a copy of File SAR-78-204. To her, this wasn't just a solved case, but an answer for Henry Collins, the man who had spent half his life believing in what no one else did. A strange feeling rose in her chest, half satisfaction, half heaviness. When brought into the second interrogation room, Evelyn sat across from Moreno, uncuffed, but her aged hands clasped together on the table. Moreno asked, "Do you have anything to say before we hand the file over to the court?" She looked up, her eyes no longer fearful but somewhat serene. "If I say it, will you believe me?" "You'll be verified." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Then don't believe my words. Believe what you found." Moreno didn't respond. She looked at the woman before her, wondering if behind that calm lay guilt or a memory buried so deep that its owner no longer dared to touch it. The interrogation ended without a confession, but Moreno knew she didn't need more. The DNA samples, ballistics, diary, and contradictory statements all had spoken for themselves. Outside, dusk fell over Baltimore. The last sunlight of the day shone on the words Baltimore Police. Headquarters etched on the building's facade, faint but clear. Moreno stood by the window looking out, wind too rustling her hair. 37 years of silence had ended, and for the first time since the rainy night in 1978, Richard Hale's name was no longer missing person, but victim in a real murder case. Crow approached, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Good work, detective," he said softly. Moreno nodded, her eyes still gazing distantly toward the Papsco docks, where lights flickered on the water, reflecting like fragments of memory just surfacing from the depths. The third-floor interrogation room at Baltimore Police Headquarters was sunk in weary white light. The wall clock read 10:40 p.m. Evelyn Hail sat still, hands clasped on the cold metal table. She had been there nearly 4 hours, silent, not looking at anyone, just occasionally bowing her head, eyes distant, as if gazing at a place decades away. Detective Lisa Moreno sat across, her coffee cup cold in front of her. She didn't press. People like Evelyn rarely responded to pressure. They only started talking when the silence became too heavy. She gently placed the thick file on the table, then flipped to a photo. The rusted Smith & Wesson .38 white light glinting off the dull silver metal. "You know this, right?" Evelyn didn't answer. She just blinked slowly. Moreno opened to another, the image of the old blood-stained cloth sealed in an evidence bag. "This blood is Richard's," she said, voice even neither threatening nor accusatory. "Found in your house in the wall next to the gun." Still silence. Moreno leaned back slightly in her chair. "You know I don't think you're a bad person, but it's been 7 hours and we still don't have answers. I just want to understand what happened that night." Evelyn slowly looked up. The light reflected in her tired old eyes. "You're too young," she said softly. "You don't know how hard those years were to live through." "You can tell me," Moreno replied. "We argued." Her voice was so low it was almost a whisper. "It was always about money, debts, the house. He kept saying I spent uselessly, that I was suffocating him. I just wanted a new place, quieter, for the girl to grow up right. But that night he lost it." Moreno said nothing. She continued, voice steady but laced with tremor. "He brought out the gun. I don't remember who said what first, just the sound of metal clinking. He said, 'If I open my mouth again, he'd leave forever.'" A long pause. "I didn't mean to shoot," Evelyn went on, tears falling slowly onto her wrinkled hands. "I swear I didn't mean to do it." Moreno looked at her for a long time, but the gun went off. Evelyn nodded, trembling. "It went off. I don't know how. Maybe he grabbed my hand. Maybe it was an accident. Then everything went silent, completely silent. I thought the neighbors would hear, but no one came. Just the smell of Clorox. I wiped. I kept wiping. She stopped, breathing hard as if talking to herself. I panicked. The girl was sleeping upstairs. I didn't know what else to do. I just remember sitting there a long time. Then, thinking of the shovel in the yard, Moreno leaned forward, voice softening. "Can you be more specific, Evelyn?" "Where is he?" Evelyn closed her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I buried him in the yard out back by the old flower bed. I poured cement over it so it wouldn't sink." The air in the room froze. Moreno didn't write right away, just looked at the woman before her. Evelyn opened her eyes, looking at her. "I just wanted to protect my daughter. I couldn't let her see. Couldn't let her know." "You've lived with it for 40 years, Moreno said softly. "That must have been hard." "Hard?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "It wasn't hard after 10 years. After 20, you'll start believing it never happened. Just a bad dream." She leaned back in the chair, sighing, eyes on the ceiling like someone who had unburdened a weight. Moreno turned to the note-taking officer, signaling to stop recording. She placed her hand lightly on the file, closing the gun photo. "Thank you for telling me," she said quietly. "We'll need to verify. I might have to ask a few more questions. But first you'll go find him," Evelyn interrupted, voice weary but firm. "I know. Under the cement I poured it myself." The room fell silent once more. Outside the glass, fluorescent light reflected faintly on her aged face, haggarded, guilty, and empty all at once. As Moreno left the room, she stood still for a moment in the long hallway. She heard the clerk's pen tapping into the record. Subject confessed to concealment of body. Cold words heavy as stone. That very night, Moreno contacted the Crime Scene Investigation Unit to prepare the exhume plan. The location was marked from the old 1978 house diagram, the backyard against the wooden fence, where there had once been a round concrete flower bed that Collins had photographed in the scene, but never considered significant. When she left headquarters, dawn was near. The night's rain still drizzled on the pavement. Moreno walked slowly through the parking lot, clutching the report tightly in her hand. She knew this long journey of the case was nearing its end. Somewhere under the cold cement and overgrown grass of an old garden, Richard Hale was still waiting to be found. To prove that silence, even lasting 40 years, couldn't hide the truth forever. On the morning of September 20th, 2015, the Fells Point neighborhood was cordoned off once again. This time not for a disappearance, but for the official exhumation by Baltimore's Crime Scene Investigation CSI unit at the old house at 21 Tame Street, the place where it all began nearly 40 years ago. When the forensics vans arrived, the sky was still foggy. Neighbors stood silently on both sides of the sidewalk, watching the yellow tape strung around the backyard. Some elderly folks whispered to each other that they still remembered that night in 1978. The light in the Hale house on all night. Then one day the husband vanished and never returned. Now that light shone again, but this time from industrial lamps beaming down on the damp ground. Detective Lisa Moreno was there early. She stood watching the technicians carry metal detectors and ground-scanning equipment into the yard. The spot was marked by the map Evelyn had indicated in the interrogation out back near the wooden fence under the old flower bed. It was exactly the spot in the 1978 scene photo that Henry Collins had captured, a detail he never had the chance to check. The technicians began cutting through the thick cement layer with an industrial saw. The metallic screech tore through the air, mingling with the smell of damp plaster dust. Chunks of cement flaked off, revealing dark soil beneath. Moreno stood still, eyes following each cut. She knew even a small deviation could ruin any remaining samples. About 15 minutes later, the metal detector gave the first signal, a short beep, then a prolonged one. The forensics tech carefully scraped the soil with a small trowel, and in just minutes, something round and shiny glinted under the light. An old Seiko wristwatch cracked crystal hand stopped at 11:43. No one said a word, but everyone understood. That was the moment of the final night. As more soil was cleared, Another small item emerged beside the watch. A worn silver ring engraved with 2 initials inside. Or H. Moreno crouched down, her hand trembling slightly. This was the wedding ring Richard Hale had worn in the wedding photo. "Keep going," she said, voice almost a whisper. After nearly 3 hours of work, the exhumation team uncovered human bones. They expanded the area, and other bone fragments appeared one by one. Skull, ribs, arm bones, everything remained in place, indicating the body had never been moved since burial. In absolute silence, the forensics text collected each sample, labeled sealed. No one spoke a word. By midday, the full remains of an adult male had been exhumed. Moreno looked down into the pit, breath-catching. Before her was the answer Henry Collins had sought for half his life, and Evelyn Hail had hidden for 40 years. As the final evidence bags were loaded onto the forensics van, Moreno signed the handover log and turned back to look at the house. Freshly painted porch, white windows, neatly trimmed lawn, all seeming to try to cover the truth just unearthed from the ground. A secret that had slept for 3.5 decades had now awakened. 3 days later, the Maryland State Police Lab announced the DNA test results. The bone samples matched the hair and blood samples in the 1978 file perfectly. The report sent to Baltimore PD stated clearly, DNA profile confirmed match. Subject identified as Richard Hale, male 42, missing since 1978. Along with the forensics assessment, asterisk skull shows 0.38 in round puncture wound, consistent with bullet from Smith & Wesson handgun. No signs of post-mortem movement. Body buried in sidelining position, wrapped in cloth matching the DNA containing fabric found in the wall. As she read the report, Moreno said nothing for several minutes. She just folded the paper, looking at the line in the conclusion section. Case status: confirmed homicide, remains located outside the office window. Dusk fell over the port city. Faint golden light covered the Papsco water, reminiscent of Collins's old photo. The light spilling from the house window on the night the engineer vanished. Now that light was different. No longer the light of confusion, but of truth. The next morning, police held a brief press conference at headquarters. Crow, the Maryland state prosecutor, stood before the cameras, voice firm. The 1978 disappearance is now officially determined to be a murder. Physical evidence and confession have brought us to the end. Justice, though late, still comes. Moreno stood behind the press row, saying nothing. In her heart there was no joy, just a sense of stillness like after a storm passes, leaving a heavy void. She knew the journey wasn't over. Ahead lay the courtroom, trials, questions of why, but at least Richard Hale had been found. As she left the building, she paused before the Baltimore Police Department sign light, glinting off the steel letters as if freshly polished. 40 years ago, Henry Collins had closed the file with the note, "Evidence missing." Today, Lisa Moreno had written the final line of that case. Evidence found, body recovered, case closed. 37 years later, 3 months after Richard Hale's body was exhumed, Baltimore once again became the focus of national media. The case, thought buried under cement for 37 years, was now featured in every evening news segment. But in the 5th floor office of Baltimore County Circuit Court, the real work for Assistant State's Attorney Daniel Crow and his prosecution team was just beginning. On his desk was a thick stack of files divided into color-coded sections. Confession, forensics, ballistics, financial records, insurance, motive. He looked at the pile of papers, saying quietly to the legal team seated around the table, "We're not just prosecuting a crime. We're correcting a mistake that's lasted nearly 40 years." Crow began by solidifying the entire body of evidence, from the confession to the new forensics results. In the file was a 2-hour video recording where Evelyn Hail confessed, "We argued he brought out the gun. I didn't mean to shoot. I buried him in the yard under the cement." That statement, combined with the body discovery, gun, DNA, and Clorox traces, formed a rock-solid foundation for the secondary murder charge. The Maryland State Police Forensics Report determined the victim's skull had a 0.38 in puncture wound. matching the bullet size from the Smith & Wesson recovered from the wall. The gun's serial number matched Richard Hale's registration, and the DNA on the cloth and in the wall matched the 1978 hair sample perfectly. No doubt the shot had fired in the house. No break-in, no accident. However, Crowe knew physical evidence wasn't enough. This case needed a clear motive. He and investigator Lisa Moreno reviewed the Hales' full financial data. Bank statements showed the joint account nearly drained in 1978, with many expenses transferred to Evelyn's personal credit card for a down payment on a new house in Towson. That same year, Richard purchased a $200,000 life insurance policy with his wife as the sole beneficiary. In the leather diary found at her home, one line made Crowe shudder. He argued again tonight, "I can't live like this anymore." The line was written 2 days before the murder. To Crowe, the picture was too clear. Crumbling marriage, financial pressure, large insurance payout, and pent-up rage. 3 weeks after Richard vanished, Evelyn filed a claim for the insurance, citing accident or undetermined disappearance. The insurer denied it due to no body, and that fact now became strong evidence of intent to profit. For the defense, attorney Marion Blake chose a familiar strategy. This was an accident, not murder. She argued that Evelyn was threatened by Richard. The shot occurred during a struggle, and the woman only concealed it out of panic, not malice. Given her advanced age and frail health, they sought to reduce the charge to manslaughter in the heat of passion. But Crowe was prepared with a counterattack. In the strategy meeting, he said firmly, "Accidents don't require Clorox. Accidents don't require cement. And accidents don't last 37 years in silence." He requested the tech team build a 3D scene model, proving the shooting angle was from a standing position, at an active distance impossible in a struggle. Additionally, a psychologist expert witness was brought in testifying that the cleaning, gun hiding, and wall-sealing behaviors were controlled and calculated, not fear-driven reflexes. In December 2015, Crowe finalized the official indictment, listing all physical evidence, confession, and financial motive proof. He knew this case wouldn't be easy. The jury might sympathize with a frail elderly woman, silver-haired, speaking softly. But Crowe believed in the power of details. Every blood sample, every Clorox trace, every bit of cement poured over the body. "Justice doesn't depend on age," he told Moreno. "It depends on the truth." The first trial was scheduled for January 7, 2016, at the Baltimore County Courthouse. The historic courtroom, with its wooden ceiling and stained glass windows, was fitted with large screens to display digital evidence. Crowe personally drafted the opening statement. He wrote, "On the night of November 20th, 1978, in a small house on Tame Street, a husband was shot by his own wife. For 37 years, she made the whole city believe he just disappeared. But the light from that night never went out. It was just covered in dust. Today we blow that dust away." The witness list included Detective Lisa Moreno, DNA and ballistics forensics experts, an insurance company representative, and Mrs. Louise Cooper, the neighbor who had heard the argument that night. In the final pretrial meeting, Moreno presented the investigation summary, all the forensics results, 3D maps, case timeline, and confession. The last line she wrote in the report left Crowe silent for a long time. "Richard Hale is no longer missing." His voice returns through evidence. His silence ends in court. On the last day of 2015, Moreno walked past the Patapsco docks. The water reflected the deep red sunset, and in the distance the lights of Fells's Point began to glow. She stopped and looked toward the old house at 2121 Tame Street, the place where all the secrets had once been hidden under cement and silence. She knew this road was about to end. After 40 years, Richard Hale would finally speak, and the wife who had called 911 on that rainy night in 1978 would have to answer in court for what she had tried to bury for nearly half her life. January 7, 2016, nearly 40 years after the night Richard Hale vanished. The Baltimore County Courthouse was packed. The old stone steps leading into the courthouse blazed with media lights. Reporters, TV crews, and dozens of residents who had once lived around Fells Point were there early, wanting to witness the end of a case that had dragged on for over 3 decades. In the courtroom, cold white light reflected off the brass plaque engraved "Within God We Trust." In the front row, Detective Lisa Moreno sat still, the thick file in her hands, one she knew almost by heart. Across from her, Evelyn Hail, 77, sat in the defendant's chair. She wore a grey cardigan, her silver hair neatly combed, face gaunt and expressionless. No one spoke, but the air in the room was thick, as if 40 years of silence weighed down on everyone. When Assistant State's Attorney Daniel Crowe stepped to the podium, he paused for a few seconds, looking around the room. His voice was low, clear and steady. On November 20th, 1978, in the house at 2120 Tame Street, a 42-year-old man named Richard Hale was shot dead. For nearly 40 years, we called it a disappearance. But the truth never goes away. It was just buried under cement. The Smith & Wesson .38 found in the wall, the blood-stained cloth, the black and white photo of the bullet mark on the bedroom wall, and the DNA report confirming it was Richard Hale's blood. She said there was an intruder, Crowe continued. But no signs of forced entry, no missing items, no one else coming or going. We have the Clorox smell in the house, the bullet hole in the wall, the gun wiped clean, and finally the defendant's own confession. He paused, playing the video from the 2015 interrogation on the large screen. Evelyn's raspy voice filled the room. "I didn't mean to shoot. I buried him in the yard under the cement." In the courtroom, many held their breath. Moreno watched the light from the screen reflect on Evelyn's aged face. She didn't turn away, just sat straight, eyes staring blankly ahead. But Crowe called the first witness, the Maryland State Police ballistics forensics expert. The middle-aged man in a black suit placed a 3D model of the house before him. On the screen, a red line simulated the bullet's trajectory, slicing across the bedroom. We determined the bullet angle was 43 degrees from right to left, 1.6 meters high from the floor, consistent with a shooter standing in an active position. He said it's impossible for the victim to have shot himself, as the angle is downward and offset, entering the right temple and exiting the back of the skull. This was an intentional shot at close range. Crowe asked the possibility of an accidental shot during a struggle. The expert replied firmly, no. Based on the trajectory and distance, the shooter stood at least 60 centimeters from the victim. Too far for a struggle. This shot was aimed and fired. Next, the DNA expert presented the test results. Blood on the cloth, skull bones and Clorox traces on the gun, matching the perpetrator, cleaning the scene with household bleach. Another technician stated that the cement patching the wall and yard foundation dated to late 1978, the exact time of Richard's disappearance. Each piece of evidence fit together like puzzle pieces into a complete picture. When Crowe displayed the final photo, the Seiko watch stopped at 11:43 p.m. Found with the body, gasps rippled through the room, he said. The watch doesn't lie. It stopped at the exact hour of November 20th, and for 37 years it waited to see the light. For the defense, attorney Marion Blake stood. She was calm, deliberate, knowing she was defending a client hard to sympathize with. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she said, "this isn't a story of monsters. It's the story of a woman pushed to her limit." Her husband brought a gun, threatened to leave. They struggled. The gun went off. Panic made her make mistakes, cleaning, hiding, and then living in regret for 40 years. It's a sin, but not premeditated murder. The attorney showed a photo of young Evelyn, dark hair, shy eyes, then pointed to the elderly woman sitting with her head bowed. "This is the same person. She didn't run, didn't resist arrest," she confessed. "That's not the nature of a cold-blooded killer. That's a soul worn out." Crowe rose to rebut. He walked slowly toward the jury, voice firm. "Regret doesn't erase 37 years of silence. A person is truly repentant when they accept consequences, not when they're caught. An accident doesn't make someone wipe up blood, hide a gun in a wall, pour cement, and file an insurance claim 3 weeks later. Those are deliberate, calculated actions, and that silence killed justice for nearly 40 years. He paused, looking straight at the jurors. Richard Hale deserves his truth back. The trial lasted 4 days. Each day, Evelyn sat silent, never speaking. When given the chance for a final statement, she said softly, "I didn't want him dead. I just wanted him to stop. I've paid with every day of my life." No one in the room responded. After 7 hours of deliberation, the jury returned to the courtroom. The air was thick. The foreman stood holding the verdict sheet. His voice was low, each word clear. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Evelyn Hail, guilty of second-degree murder." A wave of murmurs swept the room. Evelyn didn't react, just closed her eyes slightly, her frail shoulders trembling. Moreno, sitting in the back, felt her heart slow, not from joy, but from a sense of closure. Crow bowed his head, sighed, then gathered his files. The judge looked at the elderly woman before him, his voice stern but low. "Mrs. Evelyn Hail, this court sentences you to 30 years in prison for second-degree murder, with the possibility of parole review after 20 years. You kept silent for nearly 40 years. Today that silence ends. Justice, though late, is still justice." As 4 officers led Evelyn from the courtroom, she turned her head once, eyes vaguely toward the window where light slanted in. Moreno stood watching. In that moment, she didn't see a killer, but a woman lost in darkness too long, left only to bow her head and walk the path she had built herself. Outside the courthouse, Crow stepped into a forest of microphones and cameras, he said briefly. 37 years later, the silence is broken. That afternoon, Baltimore sank into cold wind. The Patapsco River rippled silver under the sunset. Moreno left the courthouse steps, looking into the distance where the harbor lights had just come on. She knew the case was closed, but the image of the light in the old house that night in 1978, the light that had haunted Henry Collins' life, was finally out forever. 3 days after the verdict, newspapers across Maryland ran the headline on their front pages. "Baltimore cold case solved after 37 years. The image of the red brick house at 2120 10th Street, the place once forgotten under layers of time's dust, now appeared on every TV news segment, legal magazines, and evening talk shows." Bold text on screens, "Justice 4 decades late." Baltimore Police Department held an official press conference. Assistant State's Attorney Daniel Crow stood amid the microphones, the blue and silver investigation unit logo behind him. Beside him was Detective Lisa Moreno, the woman who had patiently pieced together the case, thought long dead. Crow spoke slowly, voice clear, echoing in the packed room. "The proof in this case isn't just in the physical evidence, but in the patience of justice. The evidence waited 40 years, and justice finally caught up." Moreno didn't speak. When a reporter asked her thoughts, she said just one short sentence. "We didn't solve a case. We just gave a voice back to the forgotten." Then she left, declining all further interview. In the Fells Point neighborhood, where the case had been whispered gossip through the late 70s, the ripples still spread wide. Elderly residents recalled foggy nights, the light in the Hale house burning late, then going out forever. Many said they once believed Richard just walked away, or drowned himself in the Patapsco River. Now, knowing the truth, they stood silent before the old wooden fence where police had exhumed the body. One neighbor told the Baltimore Sun, "We lived next door for decades and didn't know a whole crime was right under our feet. The house was sold to a new family after police completed legal procedures." On the basement wall, traces of the exhumation remained, the new cement patch brighter than the old. A small plaque from the city was attached, reading site of the 1978 Hale case, forensic landmark. 2015, the house became a stop on Maryland Police Academy training, courses where forensic students learned about cold cases and the power of physical evidence preserved for decades. On social media, Baltimore residents discussed endlessly. Some condemned Evelyn Hail, seeing her as a symbol of deceit and cruelty. Others pied her, a woman suppressed, living in fear and lies into old age. But whichever side, all agreed justice had come, though late. At Baltimore Police Headquarters, file #78204 was returned to storage for the last time. The frayed brown-covered binder, once in Henry Collins's hands, then Lisa Moreno's, was now placed in a new preservation box with digital copies and case photos. On the final page of the file, a red stamp read, "Closed. Conviction obtained." Moreno personally wrote the summary report. Concise and succinct. Remains recovered. Conviction secured. Case closed after 37 years. Evidence preserved for record. As she signed, she paused for a moment. In her mind, the image of Henry Collins appeared. The officer from years ago who wrote, "Suspect likely domestic evidence missing." Now that line had a continuation he never saw. That afternoon, Moreno left headquarters. Baltimore's winter sky was cold and clear. She walked along the Patapsco docks, where the late sun lit the water in silver streaks. In the distance, Fells Point lay peaceful. No more crime scene tape, just old houses silent by the river as if nothing had ever happened. She stopped looking toward 2120 Tame Street, the place where the story began and ended. After 40 years, the light in that house had finally gone out. But somewhere in the city, in the stored files and in the memories of those who saw it, the light of justice still burned, persistent, quiet, and never out. The story at 2120 M Street shows that justice in the United States can come late but not lost. And every small choice in family life leaves big consequences. Evelyn chose to speak of a stranger, clean with Clorox and hide 38, thinking silence would bury the truth. 40 years later, the Clorox smell bullet mark and Seiko stopped at 11:43 spoke up. A practical lesson for us today. If family falls into financial stress, life insurance or persistent arguments like this couple, seek help early. Financial counseling, marriage therapy. Credit advising instead of letting conflicts escalate with guns in the home, a common reality in the US. Follow safe storage, separate ammo, safety training, and clear agreements among members. "I didn't mean to shoot" doesn't save anyone before a jury, when a 43-degree bullet angle and cleaning traces accuse concealment from the community side. The neighbor hearing the 11:30 p.m. argument reminds us to value domestic violence signals. If you notice something off, note the time, sounds, lights. Those small bits become key puzzle pieces later. As citizens understand the value of preserving scenes and cooperating honestly with police, wiping it clean can turn an accident into a felony. Finally, Lisa Moreno-style persistence. Rereading files, cross-checking DNA, ballistics, urges us not to let go of truth in our own lives. Manage paperwork, keep journals, save emails, texts, because accurate evidence is an ally of conscience. In court and in every relationship, if you believe justice can come even late, like the case at 2120 Tame Street, hit subscribe to the channel to join us in exploring more secrets revealed after decades of silence. Thank you for watching. See you in the next episode of True Crime, Unforgettable American Case.